it's Dan. Dan Rubinstein, is it?
It is. Hey, Kevin, how are you?
Cheers, cheers. Whiskey Fireside chat. I'm having leftover whiskey from my last solo trip. It's a red breast. Not much left though. It's a solo trip.
It's a little spot of Jameson's. We don't have any more bourbon in the house because of the tariff war, so I'm back to Jameson's.
There you go. It's funny. I found a bottle of bourbon down in the basement. I was going to use that. I go, no, no, I shouldn't be. But yeah, so let me start off with this like fantastic book, Waterborne with an E. Deep meaning behind that. So tell everybody about this trip. Where did you go?
Yeah, so physically on the water, I live in Ottawa, and I paddled from Ottawa to Montreal, New York City, and Toronto, and then back to Ottawa. So about a 2,000 kilometer loop. But mentally and psychologically, I went lots of different places while doing the paddling trip.
Yeah, well, so the physical route itself, though, let's start with that. So why? Why south? Why in urban areas? Why with people? There's so many questions I have for you, but why that route in particular?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of paddlers and hikers, I like loops, right? So that was one of my criteria. I also really like to explore places close to home. So I'm all for, traveling around the world and exploring distant, exotic locations, but there's a lot of cool things right in my own backyard.
I just lost you, Dan.
Yeah, you lost me. I am gonna. This is real time whiskey chat. Solutionizing. I'm gonna go walk inside my house because although the internet is generally pretty good outside, it's not cooperating today. So you can see me walking and multitasking, carrying my whiskey
Look,
on the way into the kitchen. Here we go.
this is how you survived the 2,000 kilometer journey.
Exactly.
There's never a dull moment. You always change with the change.
You have to make game time decisions, play action calls, and think on the fly. Well, I mean, I'm a journalist. I wanted to travel in a place where there's a lot of people because I'm looking to set up interviews and meetings in advance, but I just also to have an opportunity to run into and bump into strangers. So kind of these ideas were all percolating. The overlayer on top of this is when my mother's family emigrated from Eastern Europe, they took a boat to Montreal. They were met by a relative who had preceded them to North America, whisked them down to New York City. My mom met my dad there. He was a grad student from South America. They met, they got married, and when they were ready to start having a family, they decided to leave the tumultuous US in the 60s for Canada and move to Toronto, which is where I was born and raised. So Ottawa, Montreal, New York, Toronto kind of connects my family stops to North America as well.
That's great. How long did it take you?
Did it over 4 months in the summer of 2023, about 10 or 11 weeks of paddling on the water. I used a 14-foot inflatable sup. Inflatable boards are really durable, carry a lot of gear, decent performance, but I could also deflate it, roll it up, and hop on a bus or a car or whatever. So I did Ottawa, Montreal as a week-long leg, came home for a bit to get organized, did Montreal to New York to Toronto over the bulk of the summer, came home for a bit to catch up on my domestic responsibilities, and then I did the final leg, Toronto to Ottawa in September. So having an inflatable allowed me to kind of be portable and be off the water as well.
Well, and that's the kicker too, because I've been reading about you in the sup world, and you're the unsung hero for them. And that's a good label for you. And why the paddleboard? Like it was funny. I was reading your book, and then my partner goes, "Oh, so you're reading another canoe journey?" No, no, it's a stand up.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, I have canoed a little bit. I have kayaked a little bit. They're worthy pursuits, and I'm not going to denigrate those much more common and popular modes of paddling. But for me, when you're standing, especially doing a long distance trip, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, you can shift around and move around a fair bit. When I'm sitting in a canoe or kayak, you're much more stationary. Personally, it's harder on my back, it's harder on my knees. I don't think I could canoe or kayak for 10, 12 hours, but I could sup for 10, 12 hours. So I think it's easier in a sense, but the thing that I didn't kind of anticipate, which really kind of helped me out through the journey, was you stand out because it's weird because you're this guy standing on this weird blow up toy basically, and if you want interaction with people, being on a strange vessel facilitates that. So it had this kind of bonus effect of what the hell are you on? Where the hell are you going? And that led to a lot of great conversations with people.
Yeah, I really felt that it was because this journey was a journalistic adventure, right? To meet people, not to get away from people. And
Exactly.
by doing that, you caught their attention for sure. You were different.
Yeah, you stand out. I mean, I like one of the parts that I really like. I when I did the Erie Canal, which is like 360 miles from the Hudson River to Buffalo, I was going east to west, and prevailing winds go from west to east. And there's not a ton of current, especially when I was there in July into August, but the prevailing currents go from west to east. So every day, so many people in boats on the shore, picnicking, hiking, whatever kept saying, "You're going the wrong way," which was kind of fun, right? It's kind of fun to stand out. You know what? I'm not in a rush. I don't mind putting in the work. So, it might seem like the wrong way, but it's just another way to start engaging with people.
It was very refreshing too. The people you met, you saw a lot of good in humans, more so than not. What was one of your most unique encounters with people?
Couple stand out. One was on the Erie Canal, so I got some local media coverage and some small town papers, so people kind of knew who I was and was passing through their part of New York State. And I met a couple one day. They were standing beside the canal. They saw me coming. They waved me over. We had a chat. They had read about me. And they said I was planning to camp in a town called Albion that night. And when you're paddling or cycling along the path along the Erie Canal, you can camp in these little towns. You can't just drive up and camp, but if you're a boater, you can camp. So I told them where I was going to stay, and they said, "Oh, we live there. Why don't we come meet you? We'll bring some food and we'll hang out." And I was tired and had kind of a late night the night before, and part of me was thinking, I just want to just chill, get there, camp, have a quiet night. But they seemed insistent. So I was like, okay, great, that'd be fun. This couple, Doug and Sue, they met me there. They brought some homemade cookies and some snacks and a six pack. And the river landing in this town was kind of rough, and there were just some people around who seemed like they were living hard lives. And everywhere I camped in the entire trip, I would set up my tent, leave my stuff, go find a store or a supermarket, go to a restaurant. I didn't feel any risk. But in this place, I wasn't so comfortable. And as I was sitting talking to this couple, the sun was setting, it was getting dark. I asked them if I had still had my gear piled up. I hadn't set up my tent. I asked them if it was safe to camp, and they asked, "Do you feel safe?" And I said, "I don't know." And they said, "I don't know either." And then Sue called her brother, who lived right across the water. He was a retired tugboat captain, and he let me camp in his backyard for the night. So just, initially I thought they're just friendly people who want to hang out. Then I realized, no, they're actually here to kind of keep an eye on me because they don't want me to have a negative experience in their community. And not only keep an eye on me, they're taking care of me, which was really wonderful.
What about the natural environment? How bad was the big water? Like you paddled on some really big water.
Yeah, I mean the toughest day I've ever had paddling anywhere, and I've done a fair bit on the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and I surf on a paddleboard on ocean and river waves. So I'm used to rough stuff. Was the western end of Lake Ontario. So the day I went from St. Catharines to Burlington, there was a forecast for a fairly gentle wind from the east, and I was heading kind of northwest. So I thought, okay, I'll get a nice little push. But the wind grew and grew, and it's got the entire length of Lake Ontario to build at that end of it. So by kind of mid-afternoon, the waves were 4 or 5 feet, and I was paddling on a sup. You switch sides, every 10, 15, whatever strokes to keep yourself tracking straight. So this was all left side paddling with the wind on my right for 6, 7 hours, big waves, fell in a bunch of times, hadn't fallen in at all on the trip, but the water's warm. I'm wearing a PFD. I'm leashed to the board, so there's no real risk. And one of the times I fell and the board actually flipped over, which I hadn't considered happening because I've got about 60 pounds of gear and dry bags lashed to the deck. And I was kind of bobbing in the water beside my board, thinking, okay, I don't know what I do here because I didn't think this was a possibility. But it was actually really easy to upright the board, shove the dry bags back into position, and keep going. Had that maneuver been difficult, I probably would have realized this is too dangerous today. I'm probably going to fall in again, and I would have just headed to shore and figured it out. But yeah, so that was the one particularly challenging day.
Another question just came to my mind because just when you're talking there, my daughter phoned me, which she never phones me, right? So I'm thinking, why now? You have two daughters, twins, and they've left the nest.
One lives away, one lives at home. They're both university students now. They're 20 years old. Yeah.
Okay, so what's their perception of your journey?
They were wondering how come the groceries weren't getting bought because I'm the one who does all the shopping. Where's all the strawberries? How come there's no blueberries in the house? They knew I was gone. It was fun to check in with them, but I think they're at an age where they didn't miss me all that much.
Did they hear from other people? Like my daughter always says, "Oh, Dad, you're so embarrassing," when I go off and do media stuff, whatever. How do they react to your fame and fortune of your trip?
I think there's some pride. They do think I'm weird, but most of my friends think I'm weird too. So, but no, I think they're proud. I don't think they quite understand why I do all the stuff that I do. I think they're thankful that I don't try to drag them along on too much of these things. So we do some paddling together. I remember a few years ago when they were younger, the three of us on three paddleboards paddled to an island in Thousand Islands National Park for a night of camping, and that was so much fun. It's not a crazy difficult trip, but it's fun to get out there on the water with them. And as long as the conditions are good and the weather's decent, they love doing stuff like this with me. Just not to the extent that I enjoy it.
Okay, so why would you do this? You personally, I always think the people that do these extraordinary trips, they're very unique individuals. You can't be normal to do a trip like this. I mean, and that's a good thing. That's a compliment to anybody, right? But why personally would you actually, if you had to sort of sit down and explain to them why you do this, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean this particular trip and similar kind of journalistic outdoor movement types of projects that I've done over the years, most of them either paddling or walking. The inspiration is often a sense of unease, right? In this case, I was nearing 50. I'm concerned about climate change. I'm concerned about polarization in the world and just social media toxicity. As my children get older, I'm wondering about my identity as a, middle-aged man. So all of this kind of anxiety is swirling around. And as a writer and as somebody who loves paddleboarding, I think, well, what can I do about this? Well, I can explore this idea that blue space, that spending time in aquatic environments is good for our health and it's good for the health of the planet. That's something positive that I can bring to readers through work that I do. How can I do this through a paddling trip? And I know myself well enough to know that I don't have the capacity to paddle across the Atlantic Ocean. I'm not that type of expeditioner, but I can go somewhere strange. My first overnight trip on a sup, when I was just getting into the sport, I took a train from Ottawa to Smiths Falls and paddled back over 2 days. I had a short board with a heavy paddle from Canadian Tire and didn't really know what I was doing. I had an Airbnb book, not even camping, and I didn't bring bug spray. So at 9 o'clock, I had like 4 or 5K to go, and the mosquitoes attacked me. And so I don't always make the best decisions, but I like kind of exploring these fissures, these little seams in our world, and finding stories there. And I think readers can identify with these types of stories because it's not climbing Everest or crossing an ocean. It's something that's much more familiar. These landscapes are much more familiar to them. So I just like puzzling together these things, whether it's a magazine story or a book.
Yeah, to me, you have a Robert Perkins feel. I don't know if you've ever read Robert Perkins or seen
I'm
him.
not familiar. No, I should.
Yeah, look him up, and it's like your twin.
Okay.
Yeah, because he went to England and then paddled to Scotland and met people along the way, and it was a journalistic adventure, just like you, right?
This was the town where Lewis Carroll once walked his pet lobster down the high street, where he used to teach and dream of his young Alice.
Would you also switch and just go to the far north and do a trip like that, or are the people the more important part of the trip?
No, yeah, in the right context, with the right supports and right people, I would love to do something like that. A friend of mine, Carl Kruger, an amazing American paddleboarder, is currently doing a multi-year sup trip through the Northwest Passage.
I've really moved through some zones, and this one, when you get up on the tundras, this area is it's all rock and just these little clumps of lichen and moss. It looks like a petri dish when you're looking out over the tundra. There's just little dots of little green things trying to get going in the sand.
And Carl is an amazing athlete. He did the race to Alaska, which is Washington State to the Panhandle, 750 miles. He did it in 15 days on a sup, unsupported, just phenomenal. If Carl ever said, "Hey, do you want to join me for one of my legs up north?" I would love to do something like that. So yeah, I would love to go in. And I mean, I don't mean to criticize, kind of capital A adventure writing. I'm a big fan of and friends with people like Bruce Kirkby in British Columbia, who does incredible things. I feel honored that Colin Angus, one of my inspirations, provided a blurb for my book, and I remember him and his wife Julie rowing and biking from Scotland to Syria, tracing their kind of families' stops in Europe and the Middle East.
Why? Why did you do this? And how are you going to outdo yourself? And it's virtually impossible to answer that as to why. There's so many different factors. But as to how we're going to outdo ourselves, it's not about outdoing ourselves each time. It's just expanding your personal limitations. For that, it was our physical limitations. It was to prove to yourself that you can actually go out and do these things.
I love stuff like that. I think I like to do trips and stories that are germane to who I am. So when I was more into walking and hiking, which was the focus of my previous book, I walked from Toronto to my parents' cabin in the Algonquin Highlands, kind of near Bracebridge. And hey, I'm just going to take 4 days to walk to the cottage rather than drive it in 2.5 hours like everybody does, because it's weird and because it's part of the province that is my part of the province, and you never know what you're going to find along the way. It's that serendipity, right? When I think about a guy named Matt Green, who I spent some time with in New York City years ago when I was writing about walking. Matt was walking every inch of every block of every street in all 5 New York City boroughs.
When I told people I was going to walk across the country, they had one of 2 reactions usually. There were the people who just thought it was the coolest thing they'd ever heard of, and there were the people who immediately had some reason why it wouldn't work.
And he had previously walked across the US, and he said it's serendipity. It's you pick a route, you do it, and you never know what you're going to see along the way. You don't have to pick stops or hit highlights when you're traveling across a large tract of land. Just pick a line, pick a route, or take random turns and be open to the possibilities, whether it's people, art, natural things, etc. So all of these kind of ideas are the inspiration for the types of trips and stories that I'm really drawn to.
Your first book was by foot. Yeah, you went to the US, you went to Canada, and also the UK, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and then you went on stand up for this one. Your job, I'm guessing, is the majority of the time you get paid to edit.
Yeah, I mean, my day job is as a writer at Carleton University in the communications department. Most of my career, I've been a journalist, writing and editing magazine stories. So yeah, I do a fair bit of editing as well.
So I'm guessing then your pleasure is not to edit, it's actually to write.
I actually enjoy editing. I think I find it easier. I find writing really challenging. I find writing really, I don't know what your take is, but I just, even after an inspiring trip with so much great material, you sit down at the computer and it's agonizing sometimes. Sometimes it flows, but sometimes it's all the cliches about neuroses and writer's block. And every day in the first couple months working on the walking book, I was ready to quit because I didn't know if I would get there and what the book was and whether I had anything valid to say. With editing, it's other people who are doing the grunt work, and your job is to just help bring their voice out and help facilitate their connection to the audience. And I really like that role. And I like the organizational role of editing. I like, having an 82-page magazine as a canvas to play with and knowing where each little piece and big piece is at and having them all come together into this beautiful kind of thing. So I really enjoy that. The writing is, I don't know, it's kind of maybe my penance for something, but I can't not do it, but I don't find it easy, and I don't always find it enjoyable.
Well, the big question is, did you edit your own book then, or did you get an editor to edit your book?
I'm lucky that my wife, Lisa Gregoire, who's an amazing writer as well. She writes mostly nonfiction too. She's always my first reader, and Lisa is great because she can find the problems, but also point out what's working. So she read everything first. Another good friend and a former editor of mine and a mentor, former Canadian Geographic editor Rick Boychuk, volunteered to be a second reader. So after Lisa went through stuff and I made changes. Rick read everything, and then I had an amazing editor, Jen Knock at ECW Press, who I worked with on Born to Walk, my first book. So once I had material ready, I sent it to Jen in chunks, and she got the big picture stuff. She knew how the details had to work, and because it had already gone through a couple of readers already, it wasn't polished, but it was fairly clean. So she was able to do more of the fine tuning stuff that a first reader has to do. So I am rigorous in editing my own work, and I do enjoy that part of the writing process. I like going over text again and again and again and again and again. So you get so familiar with it that, by the time you're also getting so sick of it on the flip side, but you get so familiar with it that I'll see a word and remember, oh yeah, I used that word 150 pages ago. Do I want it here too to kind of reinforce the idea for some repetition? Or I don't want to repeat myself here. So whether it's words or ideas or sentiments or situations, when you're so rigorous and pouring over your text again and again and again, you're able to really kind of play with it in that really detailed way. And I like that part of the writing process, just not the staring at a blank screen kind of phase. Nobody likes that.
No, this isn't totally different writers that I've met through my career. I'm totally opposite than you. I need an editor. The editor is God herself, right? I can write a great story, but it's one editor, Kathy Fraser. She's edited my stuff for over 30 years, and yeah, she knows how to put it all together. And because I'm all blah. Yeah, I know other people like Alec Ross, your friend, good writer. He's like you. He's an editor and writes, but you can tell when you read the stories, like this is a well-written book.
Thank you.
Book. And you've captured all those characters along the way in a good, readable way. Has anybody actually come back to you that you met and said, "Hey, I'm in your book"?
Yeah, yeah. I one of the I was able to convince my publisher that to help kind of market the book, we should send copies to a couple dozen of the folks who are part of the book, and they agreed to do that. And most of them are happy to be featured. But one woman who got back to me, a woman named Kate Morse, who runs this amazing park in a community in New York State, Schuylerville on the Champlain Canal. It's an island that was terribly polluted, and the community kind of rolled up its sleeves and cleaned it up and created not only a beautiful, magical park, but a gathering place that has really played a key role in the resurgence of the whole town. Kate was happy that the park was featured in that way, and the community's kind of volunteer spirit was featured. But when I went out for dinner in the town that night, I went to the brew pub, and I was tired and hungry, and I ordered a ton of food. And the bartender, a guy named Max, said, "You put on a lot of miles today?" And I said, "Yeah, I paddled down from here." And right away, instead of asking me questions about my trip, he said, "I got to show you something." And he ran and got his phone and showed me a picture of the canoe that his girlfriend had just given him for his birthday the day before. And so I included that little anecdote in the book. And when Kate got back to me and said, "I'm really happy that me and the park were featured, but Max at the brew pub is thrilled that his canoe got a mention in the book." So little things like that, which really keep the story going. It's nice to be able to include them. And he was just a nice guy. He was a friendly encounter. We talked about paddling, so there was a synergy there. And I love those little notes. And I hope people who are featured in the book enjoy the representations that I captured.
I know sometimes it was all organic, and there are other times you actually set up interviews along the way. Was there a time when probably when you set up something, when you met that person, you're like, "This is not organic. This is a bad story. I'm not putting this in the book." Did that ever happen?
I don't think so. I don't think it even happened once. Like some of the meetings and interviews weren't as central to the themes I was writing about. Some weren't as dramatic or funny, and some were more difficult to kind of convey to readers than others. But I think everything fit. I spent a bit of time with a couple of older men on the Erie Canal who were kind of ambassadors for the canal. Different relationships to it, but just loved it and loved talking about it and showing people their stretch of the canal. And it didn't exactly fit what I was doing, but both of these men said some really interesting and I would say profound things. One of them talked to me about all the effort that went into building the canal and just the work ethic. And, made kind of a couple comments, almost like kids these days don't have the same get up and go. And on one hand, as I write in the book, you could construe that as an older man complaining about kids these days. But it wasn't really a criticism. He was saying something along the lines of we really need to, as a society, as a community, tap into that spirit of working together, putting in labor over time to build things meaningful that last. And that's a really, I think, a really positive message, not shape up and get to work, you young whippersnapper. It's we need to work together to build things that last. And if you think about challenges we're facing, such as climate change, nobody's going to snap their fingers and invent the technology that's going to stop global warming tomorrow. But if we put in effort over a long amount of time, we can help push the pendulum the other way, I think. So I was able to, even in a situation where, this isn't exactly fitting what I'm doing, think about what this guy was saying and think, yeah, there's real depth to what he's saying here. And it does fit with the overall kind of messages I'm trying to convey in the book. So I think everything kind of fit one way or another.
Were there any chats where you're like, I didn't see that coming, and you're paddling away after the chat with that person? You're just like, I did not see that coming at all, whether that was good or bad.
One of the men I met early in the trip, and it wasn't wild paddling. It was in Oka Provincial Park in Quebec on the Ottawa on the Lac de Dumontin. It was miserable, rainy, buggy night, and I got set up and grabbed some food and my notepad and went. They had an indoor space there. I just wanted to get out of the rain and away from the bugs and just eat my supper and take down some notes. And it's a giant room, and there was a big guy sitting at the opposite side of the room. I said hi, he kind of nodded. We sat there for probably an hour, not engaging with one another. And then he kind of looked over and said something about how bad the internet was there. And we started talking, and I had to ask, like, most people are camping at that time of year in a buggy place or in RVs and in trailers. This guy was tenting, and I was like, "What brings you here?" And he said, "Well, I got on my bike in Moncton a couple days ago, and I'm biking to British Columbia." And I was like, "Okay, do you mind if I ask you a few questions about that? I'm writing a book." And he was like, "Yeah, sure." And it was a profound conversation. This guy, Chris Aubuchon, had a very difficult life. And I won't get into the details, but suffered horrible abuse as a child, as an orphan, and had learned recently that in British Columbia, which is where he grew up, new legislation said that any former wards of the state could go back to school, go to university or college, and the province would pay for it, no matter how old they are. Used to be you had to be like 20 to be able to get your education covered. And he kind of figured, I've had a difficult life. I made some mistakes. He had been in jail. He had, had some health issues and substance abuse issues. I want to change my life. I want to help people. I'm in a good place now. I'm going to get on a bike and I'm going to bike to BC. And he was a big man, 300 plus pounds, had never done anything like that. And he was a few days into a trip. And it was an amazing conversation. He knew I was taking notes and was fine with me writing about him. And then we stayed in touch and I followed his journey. And he experienced similar things that I experienced, where people kind of lifted him up and helped him out. And, big, scary, tattooed guy would kind of ask somebody for help because he was out of water or lost on his bike trip. And people would bring him into their homes and feed him and let him sleep in their backyards and stuff like that. So it was kind of this not quite parallel, but nice coming together and then separation. And and I didn't expect while camping that night to meet somebody, albeit not paddling, but biking on a trip, who was doing something so profound and inspirational. And he got tons of media coverage. It was just nice to be kind of part of his journey too.
Would that have happened if you were with other people? Traveling solo, I always found that you'll get more from people because whether they're jealous, they want to be doing what you're doing, or they're feeding off what you're doing, or they're feeling bad for you. But if you're with a group of 6 people, would you get that interview?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think, 2 single people, if both of you feel like talking or want a bit of human connection, there's much more likely to have, to sit down and talk for 3 hours, right? If you're with a group or they're with a group, that's likely to happen. You can be integrated into part of a group. I've been in situations where I'm by myself and I join a few folks, or I'm with a few folks and a solo traveler kind of starts hanging out with us. So I think it can happen, but when you're on your own and open to it, those sorts of interactions are much more likely.
That's cool. A couple more questions before we end up here. You talk about the blue space a lot. right? And that water, travel on water, especially, or being close to water, helps mental or physical and mental health. So why?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know kind of intuitively and anecdotally that being in nature is good for us. There's a lot of science, a lot of research. Boil it down, we're more active and less anxious. That's good for our bodies, that's good for our brains. Really cool emerging body of research that kind of differentiates when you're in a natural environment where there's water versus not water. A lot of the same things happen, but there's this kind of multiplier effect where it's even better for our bodies and our brains. Psychologically, one of the best explanations I've heard comes from an environmental psychologist, Jenny Rowe, in the States at the University of Virginia. And she says when you're in an aquatic environment, looking out over a lake or an ocean or a river, you get a sense of extent, of boundless possibility. You look into the horizon and you just kind of envision, alternatives, changes, differences, movement. But at the same time, because water is such a part of who we are as a species, because it's essential for life, because all our communities are located where they are because of water, you also feel a sense of comfort and belonging when you're around water, right? And you feel this, I'm sure, when you're canoeing, when you're camping, right? You got this, everything seems great, and you feel at home no matter where you are, if you're camped out beside a lake or a river. So it does these really good things to our brains. We tend to lose track of time, the research shows, and are more active around water. So if I'm going for a run on urban streets, I might go for 15 minutes. If I'm going for a run along the river, I might run for an hour. It just energizes us in that way. But what I experienced on the trip was beyond water making us feel good. It also slows us down to a large extent. You can move quickly on water. You can have a boat that goes crazy fast. But generally, if you're canoeing or kayaking or paddleboarding or even walking, you tend to go at a slower pace than you might when you're navigating a busy urban environment. And then I also think there's a danger around water. Drowning is one of the leading causes of unintentional injury death around the world. There's flooding. Any kid who falls in, could be in trouble, right? So I think because water makes us feel good, because it slows us down, and because of this kind of ancient, danger associated with it, we watch out for one another around it. So it does all of these things to us, and all of that makes us feel better. It makes us want to take care of natural environments more, and makes us more open to interactions with other people. And these are all really good things. And that's Blue Space 101. I mean, there's a lot of really cool research. One of the studies associates speculates that the decrease in heart rate and other kind of measures of stress is associated with our ancestors successfully finding drinking water in arid environments, right? You see water, you're going to make it through the night. So something happens to us physiologically when we see water, because if we don't have it, we're gone, right? So all of these things are at play. It's not a panacea. Things like housing, healthcare, education, employment are pretty important as well. But the more we can spend time in blue space, on or around water, the more we can preserve natural environments, the better we have a chance of navigating some of the biggest crises of our times.
Well, hence the title, Water Borne with an E.
The E is crucial. The E is crucial.
Only an editor would do that, I'm telling you. Well, man, thank you very much, Dan. This is an amazing book. I loved it. I've ordered your first book. I want to read that. I don't know how I missed that. I read almost every single book of people going on great adventures. So yeah, and you're on tour right now, doing talks at MEC and in different libraries and such. And so yeah, good luck with all that. And what's your next trip?
I mean, right now I'm heading to Kingston for June 18, and then Toronto for the 19th and the 21st for some book related things. Don't have any big plans beyond getting Waterborne out into the world and talking about it over the summer and into the fall. Considering it took 10 years from Born to Walk in 2015 to Waterborne here in 2025, I figure I got a few years for the next one, but the early money is going on something to do with flying. So whether it's airborne or born to fly, I don't know, but there could be something aerial in about a decade from now. So don't hold your breath.
It's awesome. Well, cheers.
Cheers, Kevin. Wonderful to meet you.
Right. Amazing read, really is.
Thank
I
you so
read
much for
I
everything.
read it in 4 days.